Right, I came across this post on X by Make Europa Snow, of course, by a white supremacist, and I found it quite interesting actually. So I decided I'll share it with you and I'll read it out loud. She says, "Dear non whites, just because you were born in a certain white country doesn't mean you have the same rights as the white people who were born, bred, raised, and have had their families and ancestors growing up in the same country for centuries. You have to have roots, traditions, and be born by their blood, have both white parents, pure, and to have white skin to be allowed in white nations. If you don't have any of these things above, you cannot and will not ever be European. A mouse born in a stable will never be a horse. So do us all a favor and leave white countries alone and go back to your own roots, traditions, and be with your own race. Because we don't want you here, and we never did. We were never asked. And if we were asked, the answer would be an immediate no to allowing any of you non whites in white nations." And then she puts this picture of a white woman wearing an apron, and it says, "You can't become European, you are born European." So feel free to share your thoughts on this post. It's a very interesting post, in fact, and in various ways, it is very true to a certain type of mentality that does exist in the world. And what we are experiencing more and more is an identity crisis, where people sort of forged an identity based on the color of their skin and the social cohesiveness of their culture, or so they think. They would be colorists, they would be racist in terms of color, or supremacist in terms of color, because that is part of their identity. But it's also problematic in various ways because it's absent context. It was not black people or brown people who conquered Europe, for the most part anyway. I mean, the Turks did conquer in Europe, but I mean, Britain, in the UK, for example, the United Kingdom, wasn't conquered by brown people or black people, but rather brown people and black people became part of the British Empire through the conquests of the white man. And hence, brown people and black people in the conquered regions were then taken to the United Kingdom as slaves, and that's how they ended up there. And then after slavery, they formed part of the labor class, and when immigration became a possibility, they went to live there because they were following their resources to the motherland. They were taught English and they were anglicized by the British, and so they were just going home essentially. And that is not a fault of theirs. So, this kind of a white identity is also problematic when we see that there are whites who live outside of Europe, okay, and who benefit from living outside of Europe. So, what would happen to them? So let's carry this through, okay? So let's say we take all black people, brown people, non-white people, and eject them from Europe, what would be the outcome? Well, one of the outcomes would be that the European economies would begin to collapse because Europeans, being colonial masters, uh, didn't like to get their hands dirty and do the menial jobs. And so a lot of the working class people, for example, in the UK, happen to be people of color, immigrants. A lot of the industries are by being run by immigrants. Run is not a word. Anyway, so so that there would be a problem. There would be an economic problem. But let's say, okay, we ignore the economic problem and we eject all non-whites from Europe. Well, then, to be fair, we would have to eject all whites from non-European countries. So there would be, for example, all South African whites would have to go back to the Netherlands and the UK or wherever they come from originally. All American whites would have to go back to Ireland and where they come from originally. And then we can all go back to where we originally came from. And then we can also all go back to using the resources that belong to the land. Now, if we must do the latter and eject France and the UK and America and all the European powers that use African resources, then most white people would frankly die because Europe doesn't have enough resources to sustain itself. And if they must not rely on the exploits in other countries, then they would not be able to survive. Okay? So I would say that this kind of a mentality, if it were to be carried out to its logical conclusion, which I don't mind really, then we would have no white people in Africa, we'd have no white companies in Africa, and we'd have no white people taking the resources of Africa. And we could leave all white people in Europe, and then Europe would basically become a prison for white people, a concentration camp. Really, that's what would happen, because they cannot survive on their own, and they only imagine that they can, but they cannot. That, and then also Europe would be engaged in endless warfare, white people with white people. After all, that's what World War One and World War Two was about, right? It was not black people fighting white people. Okay, it was white people fighting white people. And so when the focus becomes very Eurocentric, when Europeans stop fighting with Arabs and blacks and Indians and other people, then they fight amongst themselves. And when they fight with each other, they bring out the worst of their behavior, and they intend to annihilate each other. And so I don't think this thing works, this whites only thing works for white people, incidentally. I think you need to have black people and brown people to blame. You need the scapegoats so that you can feel superior. But if it must only be white people and there are no black people and Indian people and brown people to blame, then you won't feel superior just on the basis of your skin, and you will create other stratifications in your societies to create a superiority complex for yourselves within your white society. So you will say, okay, those with double barrel names are superior. And those who are the descendants of the royalties and the kings and lords and the duchess of this and that are superior, etc., which you already did in history. Okay, and then you will still have a big peasant white class, as you did also in history and as you still have now. So I think it's just convenient to blame non-whites. And also, if I were a non-white person, which I'm not sure that I am, incidentally, because I'm I don't fit in the ethno-nationalistic policies because I'm mixed race, I'm half white, then I wouldn't want to live in a white country, to be honest with you. Because why would I want to live in a country where people are going to blame me for my existence uh, based on the color of my skin and say that I don't have the right to exist there because I'm not the right color? Why would I want to put myself through that? I'd rather than go live with people who look like me, who talk like me, and who act like me. Incidentally, I don't actually have people like that, being mixed race myself, being cultured in different ways. But this is the pure white sort of ethno nationalistic sort of outlook. And I think that, frankly, I think it's a good idea. I think the whites should do it. They should create a non whites, a whites only homeland. And the best place to have it is in Europe, because Europe is originally, I mean, it's the cold region. That's the reason why they have white skin, because there's no sun there. So they should go back to where there's no sun, all the whites from around the world, and create a white homeland. In this case, if this is the mentality, of course. But if this is not the mentality, if you don't think of yourself as superior on the basis of the color of your skin, then of course you don't have this problem and you can live wherever the hell you want. Thank you very much. And how do I stop this now?